Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Shannon Phillips Shyrock, and I am a professor in the Education Department. And we have a great panel here with us tonight, and we're going to be discussing past and current genocides. And first, let me introduce to my right, Moshe Baron. He is a Holocaust survivor and partisan fighter. He was born in 1920 in Poland, and with the German invasion on June 1st, 1941, he and his family were forced into a local ghetto. Then he and his brother were sent to the Krasny ghetto and forced labor camp, where they were forced to work 12-hour days, doing harsh labor on a starvation diet. He stole weapons and escaped in the fall of 1942 and joined the Russian resistance, and then rescued his brother, sister, and mother. After liberation, he was in a displaced persons camp in Austria, where he met his wife, Malka. He came to the U.S. in 1950. He has 2 daughters in Jerusalem and Pittsburgh, and 6 grandchildren. He has a blog dealing with hate speech that leads to genocide, and it's called Language Can Kill, Messages of Genocide, raising awareness of public speech that signals genocidal intent. Hopefully everyone can check out his blog. He puts up excellent posts, and he even put 2 posts up today, and I don't know where he finds the time. And next to Moshe is Tim Crane. He is a director of the National Catholic Center for Holocaust Education and assistant professor of history at Seton Hill University in Greensburg, Pennsylvania. His area of specialization is modern Jewish history and the Holocaust, as well as the Jews of Europe and the Middle East. Before working at Seton Hill, he was at the University of Wisconsin in the Center for Jewish Studies and also at Marquette University. And next to Tim is Chris Canasti. He is a social and community psychologist who studies interpersonal dynamics, such as helping behavior, companionship, sense of community, and interpersonal conflict. And this is in the context of traumatic events at both individual and community levels. His research, conducted in the US, Mexico, China, and Europe, strongly documents the ability of a group to triumph over shared adversities, such as natural disasters, wars, or terrorism, based on shared cohesion, mutual social support, cooperation, and a sense of belonging to a social group and community. And Chris is also a psychology professor here at IUP. And next to him is Mark Phoebus. He is a member of Calvary Presbyterian Church in Indiana, the session board and chairman of the Mission and Outreach Committee. He is a moderator of the Kiskimezis Rwandan Partnership Committee, which consists of 32 Presbyterian congregations in the United States and 32 in Rwanda. This partnership is spiritual and economic, having sent over $590,000 to the Rwandan partners for various development projects since 2006. He visited Rwanda in 2014, marking the 20th year remembrance of the genocide in Rwanda. And last but not least, next to him is Teresa Smith. She is chair of the IUP Religious Studies Department. She completed Holocaust Studies with Elie Wiesel and Hillel Levine, and she includes a section on the Holocaust in her world religions class. She's a specialist in Native North American religions and researches physical, cultural, linguistic, and religious genocides in North America. So this is going to be our panel tonight, but I would like to also introduce Harry Snyder and his wife, Patty. You can stand up, Harry. Harry is also a Holocaust survivor. He was born in Poland, and he escaped towards the beginning of the war into Russia, and he, even though he did escape, he was living in Russia, it was still a very difficult and dangerous time. So thank you very much, everyone on the panel, for being here. And Harry and Patty, thank you so much for coming from Pittsburgh. And we know there's some wonderful events that you're missing in Pittsburgh right now, so we really appreciate you being here. So first, we're going to go around to the panel. And if anyone would like to add a little more information before we get to the questions, then they can do so at this time. So
Can I interrupt?
Oh, sure. Chris would want to do his question.
Yeah, sorry about that.
Oh, no, it's fine.
Can you raise your hand if you're able to name 5 National Football League teams? Come on, can you? How many of you can do that? All right. Now, how many of you can name 5 genocides that happened in the last 2,000 years? Raise your hand quickly. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, that was my question.
Yes, that's a very important question because sometimes people just think, oh, well, genocide, and they think of the Holocaust, or maybe one or two others. But part of what we're going to be discussing today is not only genocides that have occurred in the past, but genocides that are occurring today, unfortunately. So we can start with Moshe Baran, and he can give us a little bit more information before we start with our questions.
Okay. What I have to say, the history of genocides are left to the historians. I can talk about my own experience, my personal experience, and the experience that I acquired from others during the war years. When we talk about 6 million killed Jews in the Holocaust, 1.5 million Armenians, or any others, the numbers don't mean anything, because each one of those 6 is a person, and each person in the Holocaust has experienced a different kind of death. What I want to talk about is what preceded their death. Death happens in wars, soldiers are dying, civilians are dying, but during the Holocaust something happened before they died. And one of my neighbors, Sam Gottesman, who is a survivor of 5 camps, told me, had he known what he would experience in those camps, he would have felt it was an act of God to kill him before it all started. So you can imagine what he went through. My personal experience is this. The moment we were forced or herded, and I don't want to use the word ghetto, because ghetto in history had all kinds of it. It was a place designated for Jews to live. They were not in jeopardy of being killed or anything like that. They had restrictions, but that's not the point. Ghetto in the Second World War meant completely something else. It was like a holding pen for those who sentenced to death. Once you're in the ghetto, just a matter of time. A week, 2 weeks, 2 months, maybe a year, but this is the end. So you imagine the Germans came and they issued all kinds of restrictions. The first thing they did is to make you feel diminutive, to make you feel that you have no human value, you have no self-esteem. You have to wear the Star of David back and forth. You can't walk the sidewalks. And they forced the local rabbi and some important people to drag a cart with flour from the local mill as if they were horses. They forced the man out one rainy day to the marketplace, and it was cobblestone, and forced them to pick the weeds out of the cobblestones. Everything was made to break your self-esteem. So now you're in the ghetto. 2 days ago, you were in your house, where you were born, where your parents were born, where your grandparents were born. 2 days later, you're on the next block, a street which was designated by the German as a ghetto or holding pen, what I would call it. Behind barbed wire, there are guards, and you're forced to herd like 20 families in one house. There is no water, flowing water. There is no electricity. There is no plumbing. There's not. You are just put in there, and you're on your own. And then it's just a question. You know that this is the end. It's a question of time before you'll be annihilated. And you have to experience all this. And across the street there is a church, and life is going on. And there are weddings, and there are bells are singing, and there's music, and our neighbors are passing by, and we see them, and they look at us, and as if they don't know us anymore. So this is the experience in the ghetto. Fortunately, I was transferred out of that ghetto to another one, myself and some able-bodied people, about 25 of them, to 2 different ghettos. Again, we were placed in a ghetto, which was also a forced labor camp. And the job that we did was working every day morning from 6 o'clock in the morning to 6 in the evening, escorted by German soldiers to build a rail line which was connecting the warehouses to the main rail line, putting down the rails, overlooked by the German soldiers who were harassing, haranguing, hitting. It so happened that 2 of my friends worked in a warehouse where the Germans collected weapons from the Russians. So, and we were dreaming to escape, and we didn't know where and when, but they had access to weapons. So we worked out a plan where they would take parts of the weapons, wrap it up in some rags, take it outside. There was a yard with some junk. On my way from work, fortunately, there was one German who was a fine human being, Lieutenant Miller, short, plump, didn't look like a soldier. I still remember him. Anytime I asked him something, he said, go ahead. So I used to walk over to that pile of junk, take out the parts, bring it to the ghetto and heat it until we found the time to escape. That's another story. It's a woman who knew the area, she led us there. I'm not going to go into that because I want to talk again about other aspects of other people, the victims, what they experienced. And I want to take a particular aspect of the women in the Holocaust. I don't know how to use is there another word for worse, but I'll tell you the facts. Women were not only the victims as Holocaust, as Jews, but as women they suffered. If the commandant of the local German garrison saw a beautiful woman, and one of them was my friend Sonia, he called her in, and that was it. She left. She was there behind me with him till the end, and she was killed also with the last bunch. Women were used for experiment, medical experiments. Women had to, in hiding with other people, if they had an infant, we were forced to silence the infant, not to be given away because the children was crying. They said, because of your child, we are all going to suffer. So women had to suffocate their children. This is all. One instance is my neighbor, Mrs. Zuckerman, when there was a selection to separate the able-bodied people from those who are not able-bodied, elderly children. This mother refused to part with her children, and she went on the same truck. And another teacher of mine, Mr. Lifshitz, did the same thing. And of course, they knew where they were going because 10 minutes later they were out of the little town. There was a barn. They were forced off the trucks, forced into the barn, machine gunned, and put the barn on fire. And this was witnessed by people who remained there because they were able-bodied, and they told me that. And they also said they saw one of the German soldiers picking up an infant and throwing him against the wall with a baby. So these are things which you don't see. You're talking about 6 million. And then there comes a different aspect of those who were in the concentration camps. How do they get to the camps from Hungary, from Holland, from all kinds of places? Weeks traveling in sealed cars. There's no water, there's no air, there's no sanitation. People are starving, people are dying. Children see their parents starving, and eventually they wound up in a concentration camp, and then the gas chambers. There was a case, we were showing here Monday night a documentary, where my wife saw a witness after the Holocaust who was a barber. And what was his job in Treblinka? His job was shaving the woman's hair before they went into the showers. That we were told they're going into showers. The hair was used for commercial reasons, but they were told to go into the showers. And it so happened that his wife was one of the women, and my wife's mother was one of the women. And he was talking about it after the war. Of course, he couldn't express himself. It was hard on him. But this is what he saw, but he survived. So and then in 1944, the Germans were already retreating from the front. They forced the inmates of the concentration camps to death marches, to walk west, wintertime, hardly any clothing, hungry. People fell side of the road, either shoot them or just let them lay there. And children separating from parents, or when they arrived in the concentration camps, children on one side, the adults on the other side. The adults would be working for a while, and then meet the end. I'll stop here. If you have questions later, I'll be glad to answer it.
Okay, thank you very much, Moshe, and sorry we have time restraints. Tim, is there anything you would like to add before we start with the questions?
Just a couple of comments regarding man's inhumanity to his fellow man. There's countless examples over the course of 5,000 years of recorded history of this, obviously. But as we enter onwards into the 20th century, in the aftermath of the Industrial Revolution, there was almost a bit of a smugness on the part of human beings that the standard of living was going to rise significantly and the technological revolution would not be far beyond it. But we enter a century that in the 20th century alone, more people died in warfare in the 20th century alone that died in all 5,000 years of recorded history before it combined. How far have we come, quite frankly? Certainly technology has improved, but from the perspective here of human nature, we haven't made all that great of progress, not at all. And what you see from the standpoint of genocide in the 20th century, it is something that's continually happened. It's something that is going to continually happen long after we're all formally departed from planet Earth. And there are countless examples of this, of man's inhumanity to his fellow man. And human beings, quite frankly, never really learn from the mistakes of history. And the same trends are repeated again and again. Take into consideration the following fact from the standpoint of the Holocaust. For every 2 Jews born in the 20th century, one of them was murdered. What does that say about human beings? What does that say in terms of the darker side of the human spirit? And it's something that probably in my early 20s I became very interested in. Most Jewish historians are Jewish. I'm not Jewish. And it was something to me that made absolutely zero sense. And to be perfectly frank with you, now more than 20 years later into it, it makes even less sense. It shouldn't have happened, and if it was going to happen, it probably shouldn't have happened in the nation of Germany, which had the land of Bach and Beethoven, which had this reputation for being very civilized and very cultured. But what it also displays is, quite frankly, this could happen anywhere. And you need, though, what oftentimes the Holocaust is viewed as, where nearly 6 million Jews are slaughtered in the backdrop of the Second World War, is you have to have here a legacy that's much longer than just the period. I have an issue with it, Nazi Germany. It's like the Nazis. It's not the Germans at all. It's like 1933, the Nazis arrived from planet Mars, and then 1945, they're gone. And it's a very, very strange, very odd period, but what you have before that is 2,000 years of intolerance, coming from the sister faith of Christianity, which quite frankly as a historian is very embarrassing for me because I'm also a Christian. To see in terms of the religious bigotry, the religious intolerance brought about by Roman Catholicism, brought about by Orthodox Christianity, as well as Protestantism. And if you remove that framework, the Jew as a Christ killer, the Jew as a ritual murder, the Jew is responsible for the Black Death all the way here for centuries that followed onwards throughout the Middle Ages, the mass murder of the European Jews would not have taken place. Now, that is not to say that Christianity itself is responsible for the Holocaust, but it is, in essence, a necessary precondition, as well as Germany's defeat in World War I, the second precondition for there to be here this scapegoating that had been going on for thousands of years across historic Europe, and then third and final, the figure of Adolf Hitler. If any one of those 3 ingredients was not there, this mass murder would not have taken place. But what becomes timeless, and obviously as a Holocaust historian, that's predominantly my focus. There's a Holocaust historian, a gentleman by the name of Raoul Hilberg, who stressed in terms of a warning for future generations that does not only apply, I should say, just to the Shoah or to the mass murder of the European Jews, but it has a timeless quality up to and including the present day. And Hilberg stressed, for as long as a group of human beings are not fully accepted into a society, they walk a tightrope between acceptance and annihilation. And you see this time and time again in genocide, the intolerance, the bigotry. This group represents A, B, C, and D. And I don't care if we're talking religion or we're talking race or we're talking ethnicity, etc. The lesson here from all of this, and the lesson that unfortunately and tragically is never learned, not just in the mass murder of the European Jews, but throughout other examples of genocide in the past as well as onwards into the present and the future, is that we don't learn the mistakes of history, and by the same token, the tolerance and acceptance of all people is what matters most.
Thank you very much, Tim. Chris, I know you started with a question. Did you have anything you would like to add before we get started with our questions?
I guess yes. I think my point, and I think I will resonate many important things that you said, and I'm sure others will say as well, is the fact that genocides are being, well, it's hard for me to say, actually. I think we are all capable of doing this. And I think that's the first thing we have to realize. Every person here sitting in this room is capable of doing this. And the reason I ask my question is because part of the fact that we never think about it is that we, like you said, never study the history in a way of applying it to us and seeing that we are as much capable of doing the same thing that others did in our times. And the reason we talk about genocides, not just one Holocaust, is because maybe we need to realize how easy it is to have it emerge or happen, or how easy it is to commit, to do it. And if you look at the history of these events, you will find a really simple script of the processes by which these events happened. So I actually wrote like a script of something that could be a template for mass violence or violence against others and genocide and things that we know from history have happened. Usually it starts because life conditions are difficult. People are poor, people are unemployed, people are unhappy. Difficult life conditions create societal chaos. Difficult life conditions physically threaten our material physical existence. But they also threaten our psychological, or they are psychologically threatening because they create uncertainty and unpredictability, states that we are very much aversive of, and they are very difficult to cope with. These events, this chaos, this psychological uncertainty and unpredictability frustrates our basic needs. Our basic needs are need for security, for feeling effective, feeling in control of our lives, having positive identity, having positive connections with other people, having basically good life. In response to difficult life conditions and their psychological concomitants or psychological collaterals that I just described, we are seeking for some way to help us cope with that. We create ideologies of hope because that's what we are as human beings. We're extremely resilient. We are very capable of surviving. We have proven this for millions of years. We are survivors. We can cope with trauma. We can cope with severe threats to our existence. Unfortunately, most ideologies of hope are very manipulative, and the way they create that hope is by creating a scapegoat, a group that stands in our way, in our route to succeed, in our route to achieve what we want. So these destructive ideologies start identifying enemies who are supposedly stay in the way of achieving this future that we are striving for, that we want. And group processes like that actually bring back that sense of psychological security. These group processes actually fulfilling these basic psychological needs that we have, and the loss of which is basically the start of this process. So these group processes create this sense of identity, sense of connection, sense of community, feeling of effectiveness, increased security, but all it's built on the idea that there is an enemy that we have to, in some way, conquer in order to achieve our goals. And of course, that never really is the way to address what is the foundation of that problem. Whether or not this will evolve into horrifying mass killings and violence and genocides, it's a different and very complex question to answer, but the template is very much the same, and it's happening every day, in every place in the world, and we have to understand how simple and how banal this process actually is. And if we don't study this, and if we don't accept the fact that each of us is capable of doing this, we will be committing this over and over again.
Thank you, Chris. That's very interesting. It reminds me of some things that I've heard Moshe say before and others also. And Mark?
So allow me to tell you, can you hear me? So allow me to tell you a story that ties some of the concepts that you've just heard here together. The story of Rwanda, regarding the genocide, I believe, began with the seeds that were sown back in colonial times. In the late 1800s, Germany came and they took over Rwanda territory through the Treaty of Berlin. After World War I, the Belgians were given charge of Rwanda and Urundi territories, and I believe the Congo as well. The Belgians were particularly brutal taskmasters. They were in it, King Leopold II was in it for the resources and for whatever he could get to bring glory to Belgium. The Belgians instituted control over the territory in Rwanda by supporting the Tutsi tribe. The Tutsi tribe was favored for a couple of reasons. One, because they were only 15% of the population, so they were a small portion that could then control over the 85% Hutus. The Tutsis were also thought to be superior. The Hamitic hypothesis, if you're familiar with that, where the son of Noah, Ham, was banished because of his misdeeds into Africa, sent away, and the Tutsis were thought, because they had maybe slightly fairer skin, perhaps longer faces of more European traits, that they were more European and more capable of controlling and of handling the power. So if you were a Tutsi and you had children who were bright and deserving of scholarships, your children got scholarships. If you were Hutu and your children were bright and gifted and applied for scholarships, they did not get them. If you needed economic opportunity, if you needed ways to move up in society and you were Tutsi, you were granted them. If you were Hutu, you were the laborer. And that is kind of the caste that was sort of set in those times. Ironically, if you happened to be Hutu and you had 10 cows or more, you were identified as Tutsi. The Belgians instituted an identity card which identified which tribe you were from to help in controlling the population. Over the years, of course, you can only put up with that kind of being put down so long. And so you rise up against your taskmaster. And in 1959, of course, there was a revolution where the Hutus took against the Tutsis. Mainly they went after the men. The women and children were left alone. But it came to a change of power, and it came from the separation of Burundi from Rwanda, and some changes, and the Hutus were in power. And then there was unrest in 1973, and then in 1990 began another revolution, which led to the genocide Prior to the 1994 genocide was the government knew that there were rumors that there was an undertow, that there were acts that were coming that were plots against the government. And so you would hear on the radio the vitriol, if something happens to me, the president, kill the Tutsi cockroaches, kill the Tutsi snakes. The child of a snake is still a snake. And it went on for, 12 to 18 months. So there was this kind of hype, this vitriol that kind of stirred the population. So in April 6th, 7th, 1994, the president of Burundi and the president of Rwanda were landing in the capital of Rwanda, and as their plane was coming in, the plane was shot down. And within hours, the genocide began. The anti-government people had been training their Interahamwe groups. They would take them to special camps where they would train them how to kill, where to go, who to look for. And the Interahamwe began killing in the capital, and within hours it was throughout the countryside. There were people that they talked to who said when they were in the Interahamwe and in this time they would brag that they could kill up to 1,500 people per minute or per hour. And it was just brutal. When we study the genocide in Germany, we learn of how the Jews were carted away and placed on trains and taken to these special places where the general population didn't really realize what was going on. In Rwanda, it was bold. It was in your face. There were bodies in the streets. There were in the fields where people would run to hide under the banana plants, out under the coffee plants to hide, to get away. You would find dead bodies. When the French finally came in after 90 days and were rescuing the Tutsis and were carrying them in the trucks to get them into special protective camps, the prisoners would tell stories of how the roads in Rwanda are dirt roads, so they're going to be rough, but they were exceptionally rough. And when morning came after their night ride to the camp, they would learn that they were driving over dead bodies. It was a bold, in-your-face time. So now in Rwanda, they celebrate what they call a Kwibuka, which is a healing time, which every April they celebrate, or remember, I should say. It's a time of healing, to remember, to unite, to renew, to engage in the process of healing. But it's taken them a long time. Their government system was in shambles. The judicial system was in shambles. There was no social structure after the genocide. And so it has taken them this much time. They are still having trials for the murders that happened during the genocide. They're still recovering, and it's taking them time. But now, as part of their social structure, you talk about groups. They join in groups. They flock to the churches. There's a sense of belonging, to help as support structure, to help each other, to grow, and to help each other in their needs, and to develop a positive social structure. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mark. You have so many interesting examples of a more current genocide.
Yes.
And, I've just studied this genocide a little bit, but wasn't it something like within the first few months, 100,000?
Within 90, the genocide, there were, it was 90 days, and nobody has a formal count, but you typically hear numbers between 750,000 and a million people were killed with hatchets and spears. They were drawn into Catholic churches and Protestant churches as a safe haven, only to be machine gunned. The betrayal of humankind, of people who they thought were holy and God-fearing, yet they betrayed them. It was quite an emotional, quite a betrayal of a culture.
Yes, it's amazing when you think of just how much killing went on in just a few months, and how quickly
Bold.
genocide can spiral out of control.
Bold and in your face, but they were wound up by the media.
Propaganda such as, yes.
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. Terry?
Yeah. Well, when I was in graduate school at Boston University, I had the good fortune to do Holocaust studies with Hillel Levine and Elie Wiesel, and I have to tell you that what happened to me with the Holocaust studies is I couldn't take it. I didn't have the emotional maturity or the emotional strength to continue that program of studies. So, like the emotional coward that I was at a relatively young age, I decided to follow a different form of study, and I turned to something that interested me for my whole life, which was Native North American religions and myth and ritual. Well, I was an idiot, wasn't I? Because I was just running from one continent into another continent that was full of genocide. I ran right to what I had feared that I could not handle. But I do think that the Holocaust studies that I did help to inform my understanding of the genocide on this continent. And of course, one of the first things that you recognize, I think, with all forms of genocide is genocide happens for a number of complex reasons, some of which you articulated, Chris. But I think for me, it happens when one group of people views another group of people as a problem, as somehow being an impediment, and somehow being not quite as human as you are. And certainly that was the case in the Holocaust. That was certainly the case in North America. Another thing that I learned from my Holocaust studies was that, genocides, they occur sometimes in phases and in different ways, First, there is an attempt to assimilate people. If you can't assimilate them and make them part of your fabric of society as you define it, then you're going to relocate them, move them out. Do you know what I mean? Because they're in your way. They're a problem. And if you can't move them, well, then you're just going to have to exterminate them, like the vermin or the insects that they are, because that's how you've constructed them. In North America, the case was really complex because all those three phases were going on at the same time. The extermination is quite obvious, all the warfare and the attacks on Native people by the Europeans and then later the Euro-Americans. The very early use of biological warfare, giving gifts to Native Americans of smallpox-infested blankets in order to sicken them so that they would die and no longer be a problem. The more indirect ways of exterminating them, like slaughtering the buffalo. 6 million buffalo slaughtered so that the Lakota and the Arapaho and the Cheyenne no longer had their source of life on the plains. But while that outright physical extermination was going on, relocation was also going on. Relocation like the infamous Trail of Tears for the Cherokee, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with. Relocations that have gone on in contemporary times and continue to go on to this day. The Lakota Sioux, the Great Sioux Nation, being shattered and broken by the Fort Laramie Treaty, so that a tribe that had once been given most of the land in the Dakotas by the U.S. government is nowadays restricted to 2 very small reservations in Rosebud and Pine Ridge, 2 of the poorest places in America, and kept from their source. So those kinds of relocations, another good example, or bad example I should say, is with the Navajo in the Southwest in Arizona. The Navajo people who were moved off of their land so that people could mine uranium. For the Navajo, like for most Native American cultures and religions, their religion is not portable. It's not something that they can move around. If the Hopi don't have access to their 4 mesas, they can't do their rituals. They can't just set up a church on Church Street like other religions can. And for the Navajo, this was especially striking because for the Navajo, there's no word in Navajo that means relocation. To relocate means to disappear. And for the Navajo to be relocated was to disappear them. Another form, in a sense, of genocide. And then, of course, there's the assimilation that is still going on today. The assimilation that began with the reservation system. A system of what were effectively concentration camps, which, by the way, many of you may know this, the Nazis actually studied the reservation system in the United States because they admired its organization. You got to worry when Nazis are admiring you. And also the residential schools, where children were taken from their families for 9 to 10 months of the year, forced to cut their hair, to wear the clothing of the dominant culture, to accept the religion of the dominant culture, to speak the language of the dominant culture. In other words, to become not Indian anymore, to become somebody who they were not. This kind of forced assimilation and relocation is still going on today. There are many kinds of genocide. There are many ways that you can make people disappear. One horrible kind is, of course, physical genocide. But there's cultural genocide, and there's linguistic genocide, and there's spiritual genocide. And this kind of genocide is going on in this country today, and it's going on all over the world, sometimes hand in hand with physical genocide. The last thing that I want to say is that by looking at these different kinds of genocides, I think it's really important for us to remember that genocide is about trying to wipe out people, trying to make them something less than human. But they're not. They're all human. And sometimes people get into a terrible, terrible place where they see genocides as somehow competing with one another, do you know? And this sort of competition and genocide, this is just horrific. I think that every act of genocide is absolutely unique because every person is absolutely unique, but every act of genocide is also connected because as people, we are also all connected. And so that's really my background and what I've learned in my studies. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think everyone has very different perspectives, and it's very interesting to hear everyone's point of view. And Terry, I think it's very important to talk about the Native American genocide, and I think that is something that is not discussed enough. You know, I really think that's an important genocide that just gets pushed under the rug. Probably, yes. We don't want to talk about what we've done, right? We'll talk about it, yes. That's right. Okay, so I just want to mention that anytime during this discussion, if you have any questions you want to pose to the panel, please text or email questions to iuppanel@gmail.com, and we will answer these at the end. And that email address will be on every slide for you, just to prompt you so you can remember. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to start with our questions, and then at the end we'll give everyone in the panel time to say anything else that they would like to add. And also, Harry Snyder, if you would like to add anything at the end, also we would love to hear from you. So our first question is, and like we discussed before, you don't have to go right down the line answering the question, and you don't even have to chime in for every question. If there's something you would like to answer, then that's fine, and if not, that's fine also. The first question is, what is genocide?
Genocide is the selecting a certain group of people because of race or color or whatever it is for extermination. That would be genocide.
I would say something that must be avoided at all costs, but unfortunately, if you look at the present, project onwards to the future, it's something that continues and continues and continues.
Well, I think you gave us a very good definition of genocide because you explicated the fact that it goes beyond the idea of physical, of an attempt of physically eliminating a group of people that share certain religion, nationality, values, and so forth. We should be talking about cultural genocide. We should be talking about political genocide, religious genocides, and so forth. The only thing that I want to really add to this point is that let's stop using euphemisms, because when Germans were apologizing for the Holocaust, they didn't say we murdered 6 million Jews and many more millions of other people. as a consequence of the 6 Years' War. They said something of like we were seriously harming Jews. When you use words like atrocities or persecution, harm, instead of calling genocide what it is, you are actually complicit in the idea of keeping it not understood for what it is. We must realize that genocide means something that is actually very frequent, something that happened a lot of times in the history of mankind, and it happens every time, and people basically don't or deny the language in terms of naming it the way it is. So don't call it bestiality, because it also is a problem in a way, because it attributes it to characteristics of certain groups or peoples that are actually identifying them as unique, as very specific, and not common. And I think I could quarrel with your idea of every genocide is unique. And I don't know exactly in what context you meant, but I think it's so universal that we should be actually acknowledging maybe the specificity of it, but we also must understand that it's too universal. Therefore, it is something that can be easily committed because it's in realm of our abilities that are readily available.
I agree, and I think it's a very it's just such a complex issue that it's hard to kind of get around all of the concepts that really come into play. I think that there is certainly the common concept that one group of people wants another group of people out of the way, gone. If they have to kill them to get them out of the way, I mean, that's what we're talking about. But there's certainly a much more complexity about how you go about doing it, and in what fashion, and what your ultimate purpose is when you put this upon another culture.
Well, I think I gave my definition
some of the
of
comments.
genocide. But I would just say that by saying that every genocide is unique, I really mean a couple of things. One, that every act of genocide, which is murder, and I appreciate very much you calling for actual truth in language here, that everyone is a moment in time. It is in a particular place at a particular time, and it happens to a particular group of people. And each of those particular groups of people also have, I think, unique reactions, both during the genocide and following the genocide. And I think that's something that's really worth unpacking. But that uniqueness, I don't think, works against the universality of genocide, not even remotely. I also very much appreciate your notion that, it's very easy also to sort of demonize the committers of genocide, because then we can say, oh, it's not us. It's those demonic, those devilish, those bestial people who aren't like us, and we don't see them when we look in the mirror. Sadly, I agree. I think we do see them.
I would like to correct something in my bio. What's missing here is that after liberation, a few months later, I was drafted in the Russian army. And I was with the Russian army when Germany was defeated. And next month, May 8th, remember, it's not on the calendar, interesting. The war ended, and I was with the Russian army in northern Germany, the Mecklenburg province, facing the American army who was moving from the west. I would like to add something about the genocide. Genocide doesn't happen out of the blue. Something precedes it. And it starts actually with hate speech. And then it starts hate action. And then it starts with demonizing the people and blaming the people for that. If I repeat something that was said here already, it's because I don't hear well. So, but I would like to tell you something which is relevant today. Today I read a report that anti-Semitism has increased in the world, incident of anti-Semitism, from last year to this year by 30%, which means about 875 different incidents. Jews were attacked, synagogues were burned. You know what happened in France when the Jews were killed in a supermarket in front of a museum. So I'm very sensitive when I hear those things happen. I'm beginning to worry because, on the other hand, Russia is now claiming Crimea, is making the Ukraine. I remember those things even Hitler made the same claims on Germany and Czechoslovakia. There are a lot of signs that proceed to trouble. So I'm very worried because if it starts with the Jews, eventually it'll affect all of us. So I am alarmed, and I hope you are too. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very, very much for that, Moshe, because I think that's a very important point, and this is something that is frequently discussed in Moshe's blog. Okay, so for the next question, and we've answered some of these, so if there's anything else to add, or if not, we can just kind of briefly go over some of these. What factors make or have made genocide more likely, more probable, or simply more likely to be ignored?
I can't answer it. Pass it on.
Yeah, anybody that wants to can.
I would say from the standpoint where there's a genuine risk or a higher than usual risk could be in times of warfare. In the backdrop of war, communication is sealed off and it's very, very difficult. You see this with the Turks and the Armenians in World War I, the Germans and the Jews in World War II, the Khmer Rouge and Pol Pot in Cambodia in the 1970s, ethnic cleansing in Yugoslavia. So anytime there's a war, a lot of the old bigotries and hatreds come to the surface, and it seems it's fairly easy to engage in genocide, quite frankly, for this to transition. I think what's much more difficult is to stop it, actually. Once the ball's rolling, it becomes an enormous challenge for those on the outside to actually stop it.
All right, does anybody have anything to add? Not, we can move on to the next question. And this ties into what you were just saying, Tim. How can we be proactive about combating exterminationist ways of thinking and acting? So what are some things that we can do to be proactive?
As individuals, right?
Right.
Okay. First of all, we have to be aware of what's going on. We have to know the facts. And we have to do as individuals. As I say to students who would ask me what we can do to change the world, I say start from your world. And this applies to this too. With your own neighbors in your own neighborhood, try to make people aware of what's going on. Unfortunately, there was an incident here in the university, not far from here, where 23 students were questioned at random, what did they know about the Holocaust? 21 of them didn't know anything. This is when did it happen? 400 years ago. College students. Only 2 knew because the states where they come from sponsor the studies of others. But I would like to point out something else about, I happened to look today at quotes of Hitler's book, Mein Kampf. And there is hardly a page there where he doesn't say, and I have a quote here, that whatever I'm doing God's work. I'm doing it for God, whatever he's doing against the Jews. We have today also some extremist group in the Islamic world who, in the name of Allah, do what they do. Now, what could be more obscene than killing Allah's children in the name of Allah? And this is the kind of world we live in. It's a dangerous world.
Well, I have to agree with this. I think the important fact is that we all need to recognize the fact that every country, or most of the countries, or most of the nations, or most of cultures are perpetrators of some genocide. And I think we have to realize the fact that in some way, our generations current generations, they carry the burden of trying to reconcile these issues. So I think for you young Americans, it is important to really look at the way Native Americans were treated and the genocide or culture side of culture side of American Native. It's very important that we try to understand the fact that by not understanding it, by not learning about it, we are making ourselves very much vulnerable to committing the same acts in the future. And I think that was the point that you were making. I think also that we have to really very carefully understand that we are very susceptible to social influence. And most of the things that people commit are not because of the personality characteristics or some other stable, unique ways by which they behave. Most of human behavior is predicted by social construction, by social situation, by social context. And these contexts are repeating themselves over and over again. That's why we have witnessed so many of these events. All of us are susceptible and able to do this if right conditions are emerging. And we have to realize that the only way to actually protect ourselves from committing these acts is by understanding this vulnerability of us to follow certain social prescriptions. We are conformists by nature. We are compliant in a lot of things that happen around us, and we are too often are passive bystanders. And I think we have to realize that these are the factors that most of the time are clearly associated with these events. So let's study those genocides that happened before and see how simple social processes, for the most part, are responsible for them, not characteristics of the people who committed them. Because if we will find these ways of excusing or understanding or describing these atrocities in terms of the characteristics of the people, we will miss probably the most powerful propeller of violence that we have in today's world, is the social structure and need to to dominate, which is very, very universal.
Yeah, I think we have to also, I think we as individuals, especially in the United States with freedom to know and to research, we have to know and understand what some of the things are that are happening even around us. I look at some of the cultures that have had these genocides. Part of the driving force has been driven by the media. Do you believe everything that you hear in the media? An example I might use is when the United States entered into Iraq for the Iraqi war, we were going because Saddam Hussein was dangerous and he had chemical warfare, and that was what the media told us because that's what the government was telling the media, and that was the reason. Was it true? Did we as individuals investigate? Did you hear much outcry to the contrary, that no, he really didn't know, that there's not, and it turns out the facts were a little bit shaky. But that was the reason that we went. The point that I'm trying to make is that the media has power over what we think, and it is upon us as individuals and others whom think similarly to band together to speak what we find is the truth, to stand against things that we think are wrong, to stand in front of people who are marching in the wrong direction towards things such as genocides, where our government might need to intercede. For example, in the Rwanda genocide, we had just come out of the first Iraq War. We had gone into Somalia and the events of Mogadishu. We were a little bit tired, and there's this little country in Africa where they're killing each other. Did we care? The answer is no. It wasn't until finally, after 90 days of murders, that the French came in. So, did we compel our government to go there? Did we speak up? Did we care? No. It's our job to speak up as individuals, all of us.
I would just like to add, of course, being aware is the first step, isn't it? I mean, we're at a university, we're all about education. And I actually, as a professor of religious studies, I actually believe education is salvation. But in any case, I would say that that's only the first step. I mean, then you have to get up and do something. After you become aware, after you become educated, and how do you do something? You can do it in organized ways. You can certainly join groups that are working against things like anti-Semitism, that are promoting the rights of Native North Americans. We've got some things up here, some brochures about the Native American Awareness Council, for instance, about service learning that you can do on the Navajo Reservation. There's some organized ways you can do this, but you know what? You can also just do it every darn day in your own life. When somebody tells an anti-Semitic joke, you don't sit there and pretend that you didn't hear it. And you certainly don't laugh at it. You say, well, what the truth is, that it's not funny. I agree very much with you. It all begins with speech. I really think it does begin with speech. And all of us have control, not only over the speech that comes out of our own mouths, but over the speech that we admit into our lives. And I think that we have an obligation at that very basic level to speak out constantly. And those actions have a startlingly effective impact, I think, over people. When you let them know that, no, it's not okay to speak in anti-Semitic ways. It makes them stop and think. It's not a solution, but it's a start.
You made a very good point, and it's something that Moshe talks about a lot, and something that his late wife, Malka, also talked about a lot, that words become your actions, and that it's very important how you act and how you respond. I didn't know if you wanted to add anything to that.
As I said, I write a blog, and the title is Language Can Heal and Language Can Kill. It's a short translation from the Hebrew, which is only 3 words. But I would like to say something else, that each one of us is born in this world with a mission. We're not born just to go through it. And what is the mission? It's for you to find out what your mission is. And in any case, being complacent is almost like being complicit. If you stand by when something is wrong, whatever it is. I know there are moments when you don't want to get involved because you might get hurt. But I'm talking about situations like this, where it involves informing people, badgering your representatives if something is going on. Doing nothing is not an option. You can't. One day, if your children or grandchildren will ask you, what did you do in 2015 when this and this happened? What are you going to say? Nothing? And they'll say, what? Why?
Yeah, I'd like to comment on this, all of the comments. I think what's really important is for you young people in particular, and for all of us, because we all share responsibility for our lives, is that you have to realize that it's so easy to speak loudly against the wrongs that are evil or unlawful. It takes much greater courage to stand against the wrongs that are legal, permissible, that are sanctioned by our culture, and we shouldn't be waiting for another examples of emerging or evolving genocides in order to act. We have enough today to be opposing, and you need to speak loudly against these things, because this is like a training for maybe for this judgment time, for this most important moment in your life when you have to stand against a very powerful
from the audience.
machinery or very powerful force. And then you need more than courage. But, when we talk about us versus them in this country, we are actually complacent in a way, or complacent, conforming to the idea of division, that it's absolutely unnecessary. When you call basic human rights privileges, we have a problem with language. When you talk about torture as EIT, enhanced interrogation technique, that's a problem. When you allow that, our females are paid 75 cents per dollar that you males make, it is a problem, and it is something that you have to stand against. When you talk about state brutality as self-defense, that's a problem. So we don't have to wait for something horrible to happen in order to actually start training and becoming training our ability to withstand, be resilient against the powers that want us to obey and conform. So my point is how to prevent genocide is by basically acting and standing up to all the wrongs that you see today that are legal, they're justified, and a lot of times we're part of it.
Okay, thank you very much for those interesting perspectives. The next question we pretty much covered, so we'll go on to question number 5. Do you see any parallels between the genocides you study and anything occurring today? Do you see any parallels between past genocides and genocides currently occurring today?
It doesn't have to be identical. What's going on in Kenya, when 200 girls are picked up at night and taken away, you don't see them anymore, or 150 students are killed in the dormitories, or people are killed in mosques, in places. This is genocide on installments, different parts. It doesn't have to be the same thing. But the atmosphere it creates is an atmosphere of fear. Whatever the terrorists have done in 9/11 or before, they took away from us the sense of security. And that is a great achievement. We are not secure anymore, right? We are afraid something might happen, and you never know where they are. But this is an enemy which you didn't encounter in history. They could be anywhere. They could be living there for 15 years, and suddenly they wake up. There is a cell which had a function to do something about it. So this is the kind of it's a disturbing situation. I hate to be the bearer of bad tidings, but we have to be realistic. I'm an optimist, by the way. I go on with my life. Shannon knows I'm active. I do what I do, but I can't be complacent, knowing what we're witnessing today.
Okay. So, for the sake of time, I would just ask, does anybody else have anything that they would like to add, specifically such as what we can do and what we should do to help fight any form of intolerance or genocide?
I would say that what could be added is basically an eternal truth from a historical framework that there's but one race, the human race. And we exaggerate our differences time and time again on a number of different fronts as opposed to looking at the commonality. And I'm not just saying within this nation, I'm saying from a global perspective. And what is genetically human remains genetically human. And I think that once that's formally accepted, and how is that to be approached? I would say the greatest avenue would be education, but these sorts of things, unfortunately, I think are going to keep happening.
What I would like to add is that when we think about explaining why horrible things happen, and this is probably the first question that humankind asks. Why did she pick the apple? What's the reason for that? Did Adam make her do it, or was she inquisitive? The question of why is the most important question that we always ask. And I think finding answers of why people do horrible things in terms of searching for some stable characteristics defining these people in terms of their personality or nationalities or religions is the wrong way to go about this. You can't blame these characteristics, or you can use them to describe things, but you cannot explain the things that we're capable of by simply finding fault in individual people. We have to realize that the structure of social context is what drives people to commit certain acts, and all of them will always be seen as justifiable, as actually right, and as protective, as important. As long as we believe that horrible things happen only because people are horrible, we will be committing these acts. We have to understand how easy it is for us, human beings, to conform, to obey, and to do nothing about the wrongs that surround us. And it is not because we're bad people. It is because the structure of situations that we live in, we first of all don't understand, and second is that we are trying to find easy answers and easy solutions to the problems that we have, and the problems are not within the people. The problem are within the situations that people create.
Okay, I would like to say now, Harry Schneider, do you have anything that you would like to add?
There's not too much I can add. One of the things actually that I guess it would be probably a question that I had to Tim. I know that you mentioned about the prejudice and what brought about the Holocaust going over perhaps over 2,000 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
The killing of Christ, the Jew killer.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, they're talking about the Jews killed Christ. What can actually be done with that particular situation? In other words, you still have priests, you have all different religious people continuing to tell the people about the situation.
Mm-hmm. I would say that there have been changes for the better, most certainly. And granted, it's a bit tragic and unfortunate that I really would argue that the Holocaust serves as the wake-up call for the Catholic Church and the Orthodox Christian Church and the Protestant churches as well. I mean, if you look, for example, at the legacy, it's very, very depressing. At the time of the Crusades, what happened to the Jews is the Christian crusaders would massacre tens of thousands of them, as well as tens of thousands of Muslims as well, quite frankly, back in the 1000s. The Black Death, the accusation of ritual murder, Jews as Christ killers. We get to the Protestant Reformation, and Martin Luther publishes the most anti-Semitic document ever on the Jews and their lies in 1543, where he encourages good Protestants to do whatever you want to the deviant Jew. He doesn't encourage mass murder. He stops short of that, but burn their Torah scrolls, burn their synagogues, force the inferior Jew to live in a barn so he realizes his true nature. And it's these sorts of legacies that create a foundation that's transferred from Christian anti-Semitism into modern anti-Semitism, which has its origins in the 1870s. In the aftermath, though, of the Second World War, in the aftermath of the Holocaust, I would argue that there is a transition, a transformation that takes place. In fact, this year represents the 50th anniversary of Nostra Aetate, literal translation of In Our Time. And I'd say that it's a step towards the ending of religious triumphalism, quite frankly. The Catholic Church stepped forward, beginning with John the 23rd, and said that, listen, the Jews had nothing to do with the death of Jesus of Nazareth. The Jews do not ritually murder. And the transition, the transformation that took place in the Second Vatican Council significantly improved things. First between Catholics and Jews, then between Catholics and Protestants, then between Protestants and Jews, and to some extent as well, quite frankly, between Muslims who were also brought in as well with the document of Nostra Aetate. So there is hope, and there are these changes, this transition that went on, and I'd say that things have gotten better. Yes, you're going to find crackpots, you're going to find intolerant priests and intolerant ministers, but by and large, compared to the way things were for centuries, great progress has been made, and that's what leads to a tremendous sense of optimism for the future, at least in that avenue.
Okay, thank you. There's really not much else I can really add. I was just a child as far as the Holocaust is concerned. I was only 2.5 years old, when the Germans invaded Poland, and fortunately we were able to escape into Russia, and from Russia, back to Poland and back to the States. So that's my part, and you probably know that as far as Poland is concerned, there's like out of 3 million Jews, 90% of the Polish Jews were massacred. So the 10% that were survivors, most of them were the ones that escaped into Russia, and that's where they were able to. Some of them came to the States, some came to Israel and other countries. But thank you for the panel for the discussion, and really to explain genocide and the Holocaust. Thank you.
Okay, now we are going to take some questions that we've been getting from the audience. And one was, some people say that the Armenian genocide wasn't really a genocide. The reason for people saying it was because some people say that it just was not a genocide. What does anyone in the panel or anyone in the audience have to say about that?
It remains controversial because it's a case Turkey's never acknowledged it, and the evidence is pretty overwhelming, quite frankly, of 1.5 million. But it'll oftentimes happen in situations like that. Turkey will say, well, it wasn't a genocide. People were exposed to elements, unfortunately, caught in the crossfire, so on and so forth. Comparable to what Japan would argue regarding the rape of Nanjing at the backdrop of the Second World War in China, said that, well, it wasn't an atrocity. Yes, civilians died, but they'll play with the numbers getting exaggerated. So I would say the evidence is overwhelming that it definitely was. But Turkey has never acknowledged, up to and including the present day, now in the 21st century, that is what happened.
Okay, are there any other questions or any last
I want to
thoughts?
say something about this. I think we should never expect that it will be easy to any perpetrator to simply say, yes, we committed the genocide. I think we have to understand the psychological processes that disallow people to do that. I don't think Americans want to say that we committed genocide on Native Americans. I don't think Germans are, Germans in this case, actually, it's a different situation, let's say, because of the scope of this. I'm not surprised Turkey is not saying that. What about Norwegians? What about, Bosnia and Herzegovina issue? What about the Rwandans or Houthis? Don't expect this. The problem with this is that perpetrators and generations past, that come out of perpetrators, as well as the victims, they have psychological needs that are probably not resolvable, because those who committed these atrocious acts, genocides, are basically generations that followed will always have a horrible time admitting that there are descendants of people who committed these acts. And by admitting to it, we will, by admitting to it, they basically lose a extremely important aspect that it's fundamental to human beings, is this idea of identity, self-identity and sense of belonging to a particular group. So let's not be surprised that we can't psychologically, it's not psychologically palatable. The same way goes for the victims. In some way, the story of Israel is a good example of how difficult it is actually to admit to the fact that you were a victim of something that is so horrible. Until Eichmann's trial, Holocaust survivors in Israel did not feel comfortable talking about that because it was incompatible with the spirit of times of that new young Israeli nation that was trying to exert power, it was trying to build new future, trying to feel the strength, not the sense of loss. It took years in Israel actually to reconcile with that horrible past. So I guess my point is this, that we have to understand that psychologically it will be always very difficult for perpetrators, for bystanders, for victims to deal with this, and there will be no one narrative that will reach a consensus. So let's allow Armenians to have their narrative and Turks to have their narratives, and Rwandans and all these parties that are involved in these horrible acts that we are talking about. I think it's not possible. But the fact that these are different narratives should not necessarily undermine or change the scope of the fact that we as human beings, we understand the nature of these events. Finding and blaming each other or trying to allocate blame and find ways to resolve in a way that both parties are happy is not going to ever happen. What we need is a process of reconciliation, the process by which we will accept our narratives and be truthful about the fact that there are some incompatible psychological needs that we have just because we're vested in our self-images, we're vested our identities as nations, as people representing different religions, different cultures. So I think that it's important that we just don't debate necessarily was it or not, but it's just that we realize that millions of peoples or thousands of peoples were killed for the purpose of one group achieving supremacy over the other.
Okay, thank you very much. Does anyone have any closing comments? Moshe, did you have any closing comments?
Well, I'm grateful for having the opportunity to say what I had to say to this audience. I wish there were more people here, but it doesn't matter. Those who come, those count. So I gratitude to you for coming and listening in a beautiful spring day to listen to those stories. But this is our life, and that's what it is. So thank you.
Okay, thank you everyone for being here on our panel today, and thank you everyone for coming. We have some informational flyers up front if you are interested that members of our panel brought, and we also have attendance vouchers. I can give those out.